Westminster Shorter Catechism, questions 73 to 75. Question 73. Which is the eighth commandment? The eighth commandment is, thou shalt not steal. Question 74. What is required in the eighth commandment? The eighth commandment requireth the lawful procuring and furthering the wealth and outward estate of ourselves and others. Question 75. What is forbidden in the eighth commandment? The eighth commandment forbiddeth whatsoever doth or may unjustly hinder our own or our neighbor's wealth or outward estate. As we continue to consider what it means to love our neighbor, we've noted that there are both active and passive ways to fail to do so. We can actively dishonor authority figures, or actively kill or actively commit adultery. But we also fail to uphold the honor of others, or fail to do something which preserves the life of others, or fail to preserve our or others' chastity in other ways. What is more, as we have seen, we can dishonor, kill, or be unchaste in our actions, or in our thoughts, or in our words, or in our emotions. Corresponding to both aspects of our humanity, body and soul, sins can be outward and visible on the one hand, or inward and invisible, except to God, on the other. And in fact, we have seen that sin is always conceived from within before it makes itself manifest outwardly. For sin arises from within the heart, and from it proceed the actions of life. Here, the eighth commandment is that we shall not steal. And once again, the focus is on sins of omission and commission. And so on the one hand, the command requires of us that in advancing our wealth or the wealth of others, that we do so in an exclusively lawful way. Ephesians 4, verse 28 puts it this way: let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. Stealing is the dishonest gain of wealth, and it stands in absolute contrast to the idea of earning honestly and lawfully one's wealth. If wealth is gained by dishonest means, it is a form of stealing. And honest, lawful gaining of wealth is necessary for life. As Paul says, if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. It is quite different, we know, if a person cannot work, if a person is disabled, they are unable to work, or if they do work, are unable to cover their expenses perhaps with their income. Here, they are to be cared for by those around them. Leviticus 25, verse 38, where it says, if your brother becomes poor and cannot maintain himself with you, you shall support him. But when an able-bodied person, someone who is able to work and whose expenses are covered, when an able-bodied person takes from someone else dishonestly or unlawfully in order to gain for themselves that for which they did not work, that is stealing, and that person is a thief. There are, of course, more subtle ways to steal. If a person presents themselves deceitfully in need when in fact they are able to work but choose not to, and they're gaining their living from the goodwill of others while deceiving them, that too is dishonest gain and theft. But there is more to it than that. Paul says that we should work diligently enough so that we can meet not only our own needs, but also that we can share with others who are in need. As Philippians 2:4 says, let us not look only to our own interests, but also to the interests of others. And so here is where the sin of omission comes in. We fail to keep the commandment when we hinder dishonest gain. Whoever works his land, says Proverbs 28, verse 19, will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits will have plenty of poverty. When we neglect our work, or we grow lazy or indifferent, when we become distracted by other things, things that distract us from the calling to which God has called us, poverty is the natural result. Or when we distract others from their calling, or lead them into temptation that feeds their laziness, or that leads them to failing to fulfill their obligations, here too is theft. Too often we ourselves get caught up with identifying theft in others, or overly concerning ourselves with how others may rip us off, that we fail to do sufficient self-examination to determine how we ourselves may be on a daily basis stealing. How about taking that unauthorized long lunch break? Or how about surfing the internet when we should be working? Or how about those office supplies that you might find so very useful in your home office? Or the taxes or the bills that remain unpaid? The found possession of another that is not returned? The opportunities for our greediness and the violation of the commandment seem to be endless. And here again, we know that the sin of stealing begins in the heart. Stealing begins with wanting the wrong things, or wanting perhaps the right things in the wrong way, or not being content with what we have and rather envying what others have, even to the point of going after it for ourselves and taking it illicitly. When that happens, theft has already occurred. It has occurred, first of all, in the heart, even if the outward expression of the heart's desires never come about. The sin is already there. Of course, such coveting is the subject of the 10th commandment. And when we get there, we'll see how the violation of the 10th commandment is the heart source for the violation of all the other commandments, including and especially this one. But for now, in our next lesson, we will consider the idea of lying and how, when we fail to speak the truth, we show forth the fact that we are in our hearts deceptive, that we have in our hearts already a hatred for the truth, and therefore we tell lies rather than speak the truth.